Layla's whole body trembled at Mason's every touch. Mason's hand slid behind her back, pulling her closer, leaving no space between their sweaty bodies. His fingers slid over her soft curves as if to remember every moment. Layla moaned softly, the sound escaping from her throat like an encouragement that made Mason even stronger. Welcome to Secret Love Tales channel. If you love engaging and emotional love stories, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any exciting stories. In today's video, we would like to send you a story called The Lucky Student. We invite you to follow North Carolina Station on a foggy, late winter night, the yellow lights flickering on the cold tile floor. The light drizzle made the atmosphere even more gloomy and lonely. The station was crowded with all kinds of people: night traders, workers returning home, and a few furtive, absent-minded faces like Elena and her mother. Elena wore an old, worn coat, her rough hands tightly holding Layla's hand. Her eyes were heavy with worry and fear, but she tried to keep calm. Tonight was her last chance to leave this place. At 38, Elena looked older than her real age. Years of living with her alcoholic husband had destroyed her both physically and mentally. There was not a day that Elena did not hear curses and suffer unwarranted beatings. She had thought about running away many times, but out of fear and for the sake of her only daughter, she had endured. But this time, after last night's brutal beating, she was determined to leave. Elena glanced at the clock on the platform. 23:30. The night train from North Carolina to New York was about to depart. This train was her and Layla's only hope, to take them away from their dead-end lives, to take them to a new place where they could start over. Layla grabbed her mother's hand, her voice worried. "Mom, what are we going to do if they don't let us on the ship?" Elena looked down at her son and tried to smile. "We will get on the train, don't worry." But Elena's heart was heavy with worry. She knew she only had 300,000 VND left, and the ticket price for 2 people was 400,000 VND. She had no relatives here, nor anyone to borrow from. The mother and daughter walked up to the ticket counter. Elena tried to appear calm as she asked, "Sir, can you sell me 2 tickets to New York? This is all we have left." The ticket seller glanced at the stack of change Elena handed over. He shook his head, his voice cold. "Only enough for 1 ticket. If you don't have enough money, you have to buy more or wait for the next trip." Elena stood still, clutching the crumpled bills, her heart aching. Next time? There couldn't be a next time. If they stayed another night, their drunken husband would find them and their lives would be hell again. Layla worriedly tugged on her mother's shirt. "Mom, what if we don't have enough money? We won't be able to go?" Elena looked around the platform and took a deep breath. There was no other choice. They had to get on the train no matter what. "Listen to me, don't be afraid," Elena whispered. "We'll squeeze onto the train." Elena and Layla waited until the ticket inspector wasn't looking. Then they quickly squeezed through the crowd and boarded the train. Their footsteps were as soft as a cat's, trying not to make any noise. The train was crowded but chaotic. The sound of children crying, the sound of luggage being bumped, and the whispers of conversation filled the cramped space. The smell of gasoline and human breath mixed in the air was strong. Elena led Layla to a secluded corner at the end of the train, where few people would notice, and the 2 of them sat huddled together. "We're on the train, don't worry," Elena whispered, hugging her daughter. But she knew the danger wasn't over. Sooner or later, the ticket inspector would come to check. If they were found without tickets, they would be kicked out at the next station in the cold, dark night with no shelter. Elena tried to stay calm, but her heart was in turmoil. Layla sat close to her mother, her eyes clear but filled with anxiety. "Mom, are they going to kick us out?" Elena kissed her son's forehead gently, her voice gentle. "It's okay. Everything will be fine." But then, heavy footsteps sounded from the front of the car. The ticket inspector was walking down the aisle, checking each row of seats. Elena's heart was pounding, cold sweat was forming on her forehead despite the cold outside. The ticket inspector approached, his cold eyes scanning the car. Finally, he stopped in front of Elena and Layla. "Let me see your tickets," The ticket inspector's voice was curt and impatient. Elena shakily held out the only ticket. I can only buy one ticket, please understand. The ticket collector frowned. If you don't have enough tickets, you have to get off at the next station. That's the rule. Layla squeezed her mother's hand, her eyes brimming with tears. Elena felt despair rising in her chest. What should they do? There was no turning back. If they were chased out into the middle of the street, what would they do in the cold of the night? Just when all hope seemed lost, a warm voice rang out from behind. Ticket inspector, let me pay the remaining balance to these two. Elena and Layla turned around in surprise. It was a young man, thin but with bright eyes and a gentle smile. He was wearing a worn backpack and old sneakers. My name is Mason. Let me help you too, Mason said as he took out his wallet and gave the ticket collector money. The ticket collector checked the money, nodded, and continued walking. Elena was stunned for a moment, then suddenly felt a surge of relief in her heart. You, Mason, thank you so much, Elena said in a choked voice. Mason smiled. It's nothing. If you meet someone in need on the road, you just help them. Layla's eyes lit up at this moment, no longer worried. She smiled slightly at Mason. Mr. Mason, you're so nice. The sound of the wheels grinding against the rails and the creaking of the carriages made the space quiet and heavy in the dim, yellow light. Mason, Elena, and Layla sat together on a row of hard seats at the end of the carriage. The night train was still swaying on its journey from North Carolina to New York. Mason looked at the mother and daughter with curiosity and sympathy. They both looked furtive and tired, as if they had been through some hard times and just wanted to get away from it. I'm still a student? Elena asked in a soft but slightly hesitant voice. Mason nodded and smiled. Yes, I'm a sophomore at New York University of Civil Engineering. Today I went back to my hometown to visit my grandparents. Now I'm back in New York to catch up with my class schedule. Layla tilted her head slightly and looked at Mason with curiosity. What are you studying? I study civil engineering, Mason replied, then glanced at Elena and asked softly, What about you and me? What do you want to do in New York? Elena sighed, her eyes straying to the window, where the dark mountains passed quickly by. There was a moment of silence, then she spoke, her voice hoarse and sad. We are fleeing our homeland. Mason was a little stunned, but still kept a gentle attitude. What happened, miss? Elena bowed her head, holding Layla's hand tightly as if seeking comfort. Then she slowly told the story of her life, about her alcoholic husband, his gambling addiction, the unjust beatings and the poverty that haunted her family. She and Layla had endured years of abuse, but last night she couldn't take it anymore. She decided to run away with her daughter, even though she had little money left. We were planning to go to New York to find work, find a place to live and start over, but we didn't know where to stay or what to do, Elena said, her eyes looking lostly ahead. Mason listened silently, his heart aching with sympathy. Stories of domestic violence were familiar to him, but witnessing it firsthand through these unfortunate mothers and children made Mason's emotions deepen. He looked at the 14-year-old girl, her face immature but her eyes filled with the sadness of a premature adult. You and Layla don't have a place to live yet, right? Mason asked thoughtfully. Elena nodded. Yeah, I was thinking about getting a place to stay when we got there, but we don't have much money left, and we don't know where to start. Mason thought for a moment, then turned to Elena and said softly, If you and Layla don't mind, you can stay in my room for now. My room is a bit small. I'll stay there by myself first, and then I'll help you find a job. Layla can also register to go back to school. Elena's eyes widened in surprise. You don't mind? No, ma'am. My room is empty with just me. I'm happy to have two people sharing it. Mason smiled lightly, his eyes sincere. Layla looked at Mason, her eyes shining with hope. She pursed her lips and said softly, Thank you, Mason. Elena gently squeezed her daughter's hand, her heart filled with indescribable emotion. After so much misfortune, she and her daughter had finally met a kind person. The train stopped in New York in the early morning. New York was still damp, and cold in the late winter. Mason led the mother and daughter to a motorbike taxi, which took them through deserted streets and yellow streetlights, and took them to a boarding house deep in a small alley. "This is my boarding house. The room is small but very quiet," Mason said, opening the old wooden door and leading them into the boarding house. Only about 15 square meters, there was a study desk, a mattress on the floor, and a small mezzanine above, enough to spread out a mat. The space was simple but clean, bearing the mark of a student living independently. "You and Layla can sleep upstairs. I'll sleep here," Mason offered, helping them put their things in the corner of the room. Elena looked around the room, feeling relieved after days of running away and worrying. She turned to Mason, her eyes gentle. "Mr. Mason, my mother and I owe you so much. I don't know when we can repay this favor." Mason smiled and waved his hand. "Don't be so polite. It's my pleasure to help someone. You and Layla can consider this your home." In the following days, Mason helped Elena get a job as a kitchen assistant at a hamburger restaurant near the boarding house. Elena worked hard from early morning to late night, trying to save money so that mother and daughter could have a stable life. Layla stayed home to cook and do laundry for all three of them. Every time Mason came home from school, she always prepared a hot meal and waited for him to eat together. Dinner gradually became the most cozy time of the day when the three of them sat together, telling each other small stories of life. After Elena got a job at the faux restaurant, the three of them gradually stabilized their lives. Elena started working from morning to night every day, coming home tired but relieved, because she and her child were finally free from the painful days. Mason felt relieved when he saw her and Layla gradually adapting to their new life. One evening after her first week of work, Elena decided to cook a hot pot meal to thank Mason. When Mason returned from school, he smelled the delicious aroma of chicken hot pot coming from the kitchen as soon as he entered the house. Layla quickly ran to the door, her eyes shining. "Mason is back? My mom cooked hot pot today. Come in and eat quickly." Mason chuckled, hung his backpack on the hook, and sat down at the dining table. "It smells so good, Miss Elena. What's the matter today that you're cooking so lavishly?" Miss Elena smiled, placing the hot pot on the table. "I made it to thank you. Without you, my mother and I don't know what would happen. From now on, you can consider us as family." Layla also considers Mason as her brother, so call him more intimately. Layla smiled brightly. "Brother Mason, from now on you are my brother." Mason laughed. "I have another sister." The meal took place in a warm and happy atmosphere. No one knew that from that moment, the seemingly innocent relationship between the three people would soon become complicated, difficult to control, and lead to unimaginable boundaries. In the following days, Mason tried to return to his normal life with a busy school schedule. Meanwhile, Layla became more and more responsible, taking care of the housework like a real housewife. Every time Mason returned to his room, there was always a hot meal waiting for him. Those simple gestures of care gradually warmed Mason's heart. One morning, Mason had an early class, so he left home in a hurry, not having time to eat breakfast. When school ended in the afternoon, his stomach was growling, so Mason quickly cycled back to his room, hoping that there would be rice waiting for him. But when he entered, Mason saw that the rice cooker had not turned on yet. Hearing Mason's voice, Layla came out from the bathroom, her voice sweet. "Mason, you're back? The rice isn't cooked yet. Please wait a little longer." Mason sighed. His stomach was so hungry that he couldn't wait. He searched for a pack of noodles in the cupboard and started boiling water. While waiting, Mason unconsciously looked towards the bathroom, where the door was broken in a small corner. Through the broken piece, Mason saw Layla standing under the shower. The water flowed down the body of a young girl who was about to reach her teenage years, her silky black hair falling down her shoulders. The girl sang innocently, unaware that Mason's eyes were following her. Mason turned away in surprise, feeling a cold current running down his spine. Strange emotions began to rise in his heart. "No way!" Mason thought to himself, trying to suppress his chaotic thoughts. He quickly poured boiling water into the bowl of noodles and brought it to the table to eat. but the image of Layla in the shower kept lingering in his mind, making it impossible for Mason to concentrate. A moment later, Layla walked out of the bathroom, her hair still wet. She saw Mason eating noodles. Layla ran over and sat down next to him, her eyes mischievous. "Why don't you wait until the rice is cooked to eat noodles? How can you be full if you eat like that?" Mason forced a smile. "I'm so hungry, I can't wait. I'll eat more when the rice is cooked." "So what do you want to eat tomorrow? I'll cook it," Layla said, her eyes clear but sparkling with mischief. Mason smiled, but an indescribable feeling rose in his heart. Layla was no longer the shy girl from the early days. The closeness between them gradually became ambiguous, and Mason clearly felt that he was falling into a dangerous feeling. That evening, after dinner, Elena also came home earlier than usual. She brought a bag of food from the faux restaurant and happily said, "The owner of the restaurant closed early today. I brought back stir-fried beef and vegetables. Tomorrow, you two can eat it." Mason and Elena sat and talked for a while. When Layla finished washing the dishes and went upstairs to study, Mason stayed downstairs with Elena to make coffee. While Mason was busy in the kitchen, Elena went into the bathroom but left the door ajar. The sound of water running was heard. "Mason, could you get me the towel on the hook outside the door?" Elena's voice echoed from the bathroom. Mason ran out, grabbed the towel, and walked inside. But when he reached the bathroom door, he saw Elena's silhouette reflected through the crack in the door. The body of a mature woman with smooth white skin made Mason stop, his heart pounding. Elena opened the door, reached out to take the towel from Mason, and said softly, "Thank you." At that moment, a strange feeling invaded Mason's mind, both shy and fascinated. The month passed quickly. After receiving her salary, Elena asked Mason to go to the post office to send her mother back home some spending money. After sending the money, Mason and Elena decided to spend the day exploring New York. Mason wanted to take her to a few places to explore business opportunities and conveniently let her experience the bustling life of the capital. "Mason, I heard Grand Central Market sells a lot of wholesale clothes. Let's go check it out?" Elena squinted her eyes and smiled, her eyes filled with excitement. Mason smiled and drove her through the crowded streets, filled with the sounds of deliveries. They arrived at Grand Central Market just as the sun was starting to set. The atmosphere was bustling. The calls, the honking of cars, the clanging of packages, everything seemed to draw them into the hustle and bustle of the city. They stopped in front of a wholesale clothing store. Elena carefully asked about the prices, asking Mason to take notes of important information. Mason helped her check prices and chat with the vendors, quickly immersing herself in the bustling commercial atmosphere. "I think this place sells clothes, Auntie. Maybe we can import some items to try selling," Mason said, his eyes lighting up. Elena turned back to look at Mason, her eyes filled with thought. Then she laughed. "Mason, your clothes look so old. Let me buy you a new set as a thank you gift." Mason was embarrassed. "No, my clothes are still wearable." "What's the big deal?" Miss Elena smiled, pulling Mason into the store next door. After a while of choosing, she picked out a white shirt and black trousers for Mason. "This is both pretty and suits you. It looks neat when you wear it. I'm sure the girls will notice it right away," Miss Elena teased. Mason blushed but smiled, feeling warmed by her concern. Leaving Grand Central Market, Mason and Elena continued to stroll around the streets. They drove past Hohenkiem Lake and then circled around the old quarter. When they were starting to get hungry, Mason suggested, "Auntie, let's go to the rib rice restaurant in Chinatown. I heard the rice there is really good. Sounds interesting. Let's go." Elena nodded. The restaurant was located in a small alley, but was always bustling with customers. They chose a table by the window, ordered 2 servings of rice with pork ribs, a bowl of sour soup, and a plate of stir-fried vegetables. Elena ate while looking at Mason and smiling. "Does Mason have a girlfriend?" Mason stopped eating and shyly shook his head. "Not yet. I've been busy studying. I don't know what love is." Elena put down her chopsticks and looked at Mason intently. So you've never been in love before? Never dated anyone? Mason smiled awkwardly. No. Only watched on TV and in movies. Never had a chance in real life. Miss Elena laughed. I didn't expect a young man like you to be so good. But it's a pity, it would be a waste if you never fell in love. Mason bowed his head and smiled shyly. Miss Elena suddenly leaned over, her voice lowered to a whisper. Mason, it's been a long time since I've had anyone. If you like, I can teach you a few tricks as a way to repay you. Mason looked up, surprised by her offer. You are? Miss Elena nodded. Her eyes sparkled with a bit of playfulness, but also with seriousness. Yes, consider it an experience for you. Besides, a woman like me needs someone by her side too. Mason felt his heart beat faster, both curious and embarrassed. He knew he wanted to try, wanted to know what it felt like, but reason held him back. You can't this. Mason stuttered in refusal, but his eyes couldn't hide the turmoil. Elena just smiled as if she understood all his thoughts. Don't be so nervous. If you don't mind, let me decide for you, she said, then gently pulled Mason up, like an older sister leading a younger brother. Mason didn't know how he was swept away, but in a split second, they were standing in front of a cheap motel tucked away on a deserted street. Come in, Mason, no one will know, Elena whispered, her eyes gentle yet daring. Elena gently pulled Mason down onto the bed. Her voice was soft and gentle like a sister's. Don't be so nervous, I'll show you everything. Just relax. Mason felt the warmth in her voice, but his body was still tense with embarrassment. As Elena began to gently guide Mason, he fumbled, like a deer entering the forest for the first time. He felt like he didn't know what to do, and everything seemed to be happening too fast. It's okay. Elena smiled, rubbing Mason's shoulder. Everyone does it their first time. Mason was flustered at first, and things didn't go as expected, but he quickly regained his composure, learning to feel and understand the woman in front of him. Mason gradually became more confident through Elena's every move, every moment. Mason began to understand more about what he was doing. His every touch, every gesture gradually became more delicate and stronger, making Elena gasp in happiness. Mason realized that what was important was not just the novelty but the feelings of both of them when they were entangled with each other. The two of them went through many moments of ecstasy together. Each time, Mason felt his body and mind become one, and Elena felt as if she was freed from the lonely and tiring days. They didn't know how much time had passed, but by the time they were both exhausted and fell asleep, it was already late afternoon. A sense of peace enveloped the small room where the two of them had crossed the boundaries of normal feelings. That afternoon, Mason and Elena returned to their room together. Their faces were filled with comfort and contentment, a quiet peace that they had never felt before. Layla looked at her mother and Mason, feeling something strange. They seemed closer and more intimate than usual. Her mother's eyes towards Mason contained an indescribable joy. Where did Mom and brother go today that they looked so happy? Layla asked, her eyes filled with curiosity. Elena smiled and patted her daughter's head. Oh, Mason and I just went to do some market research. It's nothing. Even though her mother said so, Layla still felt something inexplicable in her heart. From that day on, Mason and Elena's relationship became more secretive and intense. Whenever Layla was at school or busy doing homework upstairs, Mason and Elena would spend short but sweet moments together. Every time they met, Mason became stronger and bolder, making Elena surprised at his rapid progress. You're a fast learner, Elena whispered every time they climaxed together. One night, when Layla was fast asleep, Elena could not contain her desire. She gently got out of bed and went downstairs to find Mason. The soft footsteps echoed in the quiet night. And then the sounds of intimacy and passion echoed from below. That night, Layla woke up with a start, reaching out to her side but couldn't find her mother. She sat up in confusion, intending to go down the stairs to find her mother, but she heard faint sounds from below. She stopped, listening in silence. Those sounds were both strange and fascinating, making her heart beat faster. Under the dim light of the night lamp, Layla walked down a few steps. Before her eyes was the image of Mason and her mother wrapped around each other, naked. Her mother was breathing softly, her eyes closed, her mouth tightly closed with a towel to keep from making a sound. Mason gently kissed her mother's shoulder, his hands running over every curve of her body with gentleness and strength. Layla felt her body heat up, her legs involuntarily closing. She didn't understand why she felt this way, but a new curiosity and desire began to arise in her young mind. The next morning, Layla woke up early and tried to act normal, but the images of last night still echoed in her mind. A strange feeling welled up inside her, making her unable to stop thinking about herself. She wondered if Mason would ever care for and love her like that. The strange thoughts gradually invaded her mind, making her feel confused but unable to give up. In the following days, Layla paid more attention to herself. Every gesture of his made her feel something deep inside. There were times when Layla wondered, if Mason cared for her like that, how would it feel? Layla no longer saw Mason as just a normal brother. Every time he smiled, every time he accidentally touched her hand, her heart beat faster. She began to realize that she liked Mason. Layla didn't know how to express her feelings. As a teenager, Layla was still unfamiliar with the feelings of love and desire. She couldn't tell her mother, nor did she know how to tell Mason. So she started to find ways to get closer to him. One evening, Mom texted that she wouldn't be home because the restaurant was busy and she had to help the owner get groceries early the next morning. The owner had some urgent business to attend to in her hometown. Layla saw this as a good opportunity to talk to Mason privately. "Mr. Mason, are you free?" Layla walked into the room, holding a book. "I have a really hard math problem. Can you help me?" Mason looked up from his laptop, smiling slightly. "Sure, show me." Layla sat down next to Mason, gently pulling the chair closer. She was wearing a pure white tank top, the neckline slightly open, revealing her fair skin. As she leaned closer to Mason, a button gently came undone, revealing a pair of undulating heels. Mason's eyes were glued to it, and his heart beat faster with each beat. "You're really good, you can do anything." Layla smiled lightly, her eyes sparkling. Mason smiled and replied, "I'm just helping a little, you know Mason very well, just keep studying." Layla noticed Mason was staring at her body. She knew the fish was hooked. Layla gently placed her hand on Mason's, her eyes filled with anticipation. "Mr. Mason," Layla said quietly, "you're so good to me and my mother. I like you. I really like you." Mason paused at those words. But looking into Layla's sincere eyes, he could tell that this was more than just youthful indiscretion. "Layla, this shouldn't be. You're young, and your mother and I..." Mason tried to find a way to refuse, but his voice wasn't as firm as before. "I know," Layla whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "But I don't care. All I know is that I like you. I want you to care for me like Mom." Layla moved closer, wrapping her arms around Mason. "Mason," I volunteered, she said in a voice as small as the wind. Mason felt a chill run down his spine, and he knew that everything had changed forever. He could no longer deny it. The desire, the surge of emotion that Mason had tried to suppress, was awakened with a vengeance. Mason's hand gently touched her cheek, caressing the soft curve. He took his time, each touch was slow and tender, as if he wanted to engrave this moment into his mind. "Layla," Mason whispered in her ear, his voice hoarse but gentle as a reassurance. Layla closed her eyes, feeling Mason's touch like a gentle wave lapping against the shore. For the first time in her life, she let herself completely relax and trust Mason. Mason felt it. Her breathing became more even, and her body was no longer as tense as before. His kiss stopped at her lips, then slowly slid down her cheek, forehead, and neck. Each of Mason's touches made Layla's body tremble slightly, both surprised and immersed in an indescribable feeling. Mason's fingers threaded through her hair, caressing each strand lovingly. Her softness, The weakness and determination in her eyes made him feel like he had just been given a precious gift that he never wanted to lose. They curled together, leaving no space between them. Their movements were awkward at first, but they gradually became one in spiritual and emotional harmony. Mason let his instincts guide him. This moment was more than just the satisfaction of desire. It was the beginning of a bond more sacred than anything else. After everything was over, the night light gradually dimmed, enveloping them in a peaceful night. Only the sound of their breathing mingled together remained. There was no need to say anything more, because their eyes and emotions said it all. Mason felt an unprecedented peace, and Layla breathed lightly, her face radiant and content. After a moment, Mason gently stroked Layla's hair and whispered, "I didn't think things would be like this, but I will always be by your side." Layla smiled softly, hugging Mason as if to hold that moment forever. The next day, Elena returned home as if nothing had happened. Layla and Mason tried to stay calm and act normal, but inside everything had changed. Their relationship was no longer a secret crush, but had entered a new phase, where feelings were gently caressed and bonded more closely every day. In the following days, whenever Elena was busy at the restaurant or had to leave the house, Mason and Layla would take advantage of the little time they had to spend together. Those meetings were hasty but full of happiness, as if every minute together was more precious than ever. "I just want to stay with you like this forever, Mason." Layla buried her head in Mason's chest, her voice a little angry. Mason stroked Layla's hair and whispered, "Me too. Just having you makes me feel more at peace than ever." Hugs in the kitchen, stolen kisses behind closed doors, and furtive glances at each other during meals with Elena's mother all made their love stronger. Mason felt like he was growing up every day with Layla. He was not only her man but also her strong shoulder to lean on. As time passed, Mason and Layla's relationship became more and more passionate. Their secret meetings only made their love stronger and closer. However, a feeling of unease began to grow in Layla's heart. "You finish school. Will you leave me?" Layla wrapped her arms around Mason, her voice a little angry. Mason smiled softly, stroking Layla's hair. "Don't be silly, Layla. I just need you." But Mason's words could not make Layla feel completely at ease. She was afraid that one day Mason would leave her. That fear grew when Mason was about to finish school. Layla knew that he always cherished the plan to return home to take care of his family. That made Layla panic. Layla could not accept that Mason could leave her. She wanted to keep Mason by her side forever. After many nights of thinking, she decided to get pregnant with him, even though she was not yet 18 and was still in school. That night, Layla said to Mason, tears rolling down her cheeks, "Let's have a baby, please." Mason was momentarily taken aback, but faced with Layla's intense love, he couldn't refuse. That afternoon, amidst their passionate feelings, they decided not to use birth control anymore. Layla believed that only a child could keep Mason forever. Not long after, Layla picked up the pregnancy test stick and saw 2 clear lines on her hand. She was both happy and worried. She knew that sooner or later her mother would hear about this. And as expected, Elena found out that her daughter was pregnant, and pregnant with Mason, the man Elena had sex with every night. Elena glared. "Layla, you're only 16 years old and you're pregnant with Mason." Layla bowed her head and bit her lip, not saying anything, but then she mustered up the courage to look straight into her mother's eyes. "Yes, Mom, I love Mason. I want to keep him with me forever and I want to give birth to this baby." Elena was speechless at first. She was stunned by her daughter's bold decision. But after a moment of silence, she looked at Mason, the boy that both she and her daughter had loved. Although she had many indescribable emotions in her heart, she knew that Mason was a kind person. He had helped them in their most difficult times and was now ready to take responsibility for the child. Elena sighed, her voice softening. "Mason, will you take responsibility for my daughter?" Mason nodded firmly. "Yes, I will stay with Layla and take care of both mother and child." Elena looked at them for a long time and then nodded slightly. She accepted this because she understood that there was no better choice. Elena did not organize a wedding for her daughter, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. They just lived like that together under one roof. Time flew by, and the last months of pregnancy made Layla more and more tired. Her belly grew bigger, making each step heavy. Many nights she cried from exhaustion, but Mason was always there, holding her hand, helping her through her weak moments. Layla sobbed softly. "I don't know if I can do it, Mason. I'm so tired." Mason stroked her hair, his voice firm. "With me here, you don't have to do anything alone." Mason took on extra jobs, from delivery driver to waiter, just to make some extra money to support the baby. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he never thought of giving up. Elena, after many sleepless nights, gradually accepted that her daughter's life was forever changed. She no longer interfered or complained about Layla's decision. Instead, she quietly watched, helping where she could. One day, at a restaurant, Elena met a simple but sincere man. He always appeared whenever she felt lonely, giving her a sense of peace that she had never dared to dream of. "You've been carrying a lot of things all this time. If you want, I'll be by your side to share the rest of your days," the man smiled. Elena looked into those gentle eyes. For the first time in many years, she felt her heart lighten. Elena smiled softly. "Maybe it's time for me to need someone to protect me." They came together without haste, without status, just like the way Layla and Mason chose to live. A few months later, the baby's first cry echoed in the small room. Layla and Mason had become real parents. It was a sacred moment where all worries and fears seemed to disappear. "We did it, baby." Mason looked at his firstborn in Layla's arms. Layla smiled weakly. "Yeah, we can do it." Both looked into the baby's innocent eyes, feeling love and attachment deeper than ever. As for Elena, she and her new man are starting their lives together. They find peace after years of storms. She understands that happiness does not necessarily follow a certain pattern. In the small house, Mason and Layla still live peacefully together, raising their child together. No need for marriage, no need for distant promises. Love, gratitude, and perseverance are all they need to keep going. Our story today will stop here. Thank you for taking the time to watch the entire video. Hopefully the details and emotions in the story have brought you interesting and meaningful moments. If you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below the video to let me know your opinion. And don't forget to click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any stories in the future. Each of your subscriptions and likes will be a motivation for me and the program production team to create more attractive videos. And now, see you in the next videos. Wish you a great day.